We're joined by Sibongile Mtungwa, who is a Senior Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity in South Africa. Good evening, Sibongile, and thank you so much for your time. Of course, often, when we look at violence, it cuts across class, it cuts across, how much a woman may or may not be earning in her salaries. But of course, there are different ways in which women experience and are able to deal with this violence.
Thank you very much, Cathy. I think women, especially in rural areas,
in the context of rural areas, it is very difficult to believe that they can be out of the situation of violence and abuse. And that is mainly because patriarchy is still deep-rooted in those areas. And what you find...
Sibongile, are you still there?
Hello, ma'am. I can hear on the phone, but the Zoom has stopped.
You can just go ahead, ma'am.
Yes. So what I was saying is that, the women in rural areas especially, it is difficult for them to escape the patriarchy and the gender-based violence because it is acquired, that as a girl, you belong to a man of your father and you must get married and belong to a husband. And other than that, it is very difficult to think of what you can be. But also what we have realized in the work that we do is that language that is used on women is very degrading. Their bodies are degraded. The insults that are used in rural areas especially and in other areas as well, it implicates that language itself is gender-based violence because it perpetuates women to be called names and no one says that is wrong. So until that is being dealt with at an early stage, on how we socialize boys, not to call women names, not to use the insults, using women's bodies, the physiology of women, like their menstruation and everything, then things will start to change.
How do we better protect women, especially those who find themselves in those setups? You're absolutely correct. When we just look at something as simple as shelters for women, you'll be hard-pressed to find many of those in rural areas, even though the ones that are available in more urban areas are certainly not enough to deal with the kind of need that exists.
Women are not the perpetrators in this case. So the people who have to take action, really, it's men themselves, because this is where the problem is. And how to support women is to empower them to be able to understand their human rights and to understand that the messages that they've received, since childbirth, they are not the messages that define them. They have to create their own messages as they grow to say, this is who I am. I'm not inferior. I'm not to be used, but I can create my own identity. And I can also break from the culture that, has brought me up and create a new culture that suits me, but also that is life-giving, not life-threatening. So that mainly empowering of women and girls is the key. And mainly to empower girls at an early stage so that they grow up knowing that no one should abuse them.
The issue of economic power becomes crucial here because we're told from part of the research that often those who do find themselves in abusive relationships as a consideration have to think about the ways in which they would be able to sustain themselves, especially if they're dependent economically on their partners.
Definitely, that is true. Because that is why we promote education and say education for girls is the key. Because when you are able to get education, you are able to make decisions. So education is equal to decision making. However, what we found difficult is to think that that is the only solution. That on its own is not the only solution. Pinning down to what goes on in the socialization of boys and girls is also the key. And we agree that, yes, when women are able to earn their own salary, then they are able to make choices of who they can be with in their lives. But that still doesn't stop the perpetrators of violence to attack them.
Sibongile Mtungwa, let's leave it there for tonight. Thank you so much for your time on News at